Welcome to the Civic Hub. The Civic Hub is a shared community space for grassroots and small nonprofit organizations working to make lives better for everyone in Waterloo Region. Partner organizations come from a range of fields: environmental justice, democratic reform, arts and culture, anti-poverty, anti-racism, human rights, ethno-cultural and newcomer support, technology, peace and nonviolence, spirituality, and well-being. On the show, we welcome one of our partners to the Civic Hub. Today on Welcome to the Civic Hub, we have Melissa Bowman from Yes in My Backyard. Melissa, welcome to the Civic Hub.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Tell me, I've heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard, but you're YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard. I'd ask you what the difference is, but it should be obvious.
It should be, and a YIMBY movement, which is Yes in My Backyard, often does arise in response to NIMBY, the Not in My Backyard perspective, and that's very much what Waterloo Region Yes in My Backyard is, and that's a bit of a mouthful, so we usually just go with WR YIMBY, and we're a grassroots community group that basically urges the cities of Waterloo Region to adjust their zoning to allow for more housing, especially affordable housing.
Yeah, it's specifically a housing focused organization.
It is, but with that, we're also looking at things like where does housing fit into climate change and environmental sustainability, along with just general affordability and accessibility issues, as well as social justice issues too. Really, I feel like housing has a place in all of those places.
Yeah. When you're talking about zoning, are you talking strictly about building zoning or things like backyard chickens and goats and weed control and stuff like that?
It's mostly focused on things related to housing. So right now, some people might be familiar with ADUs, that's accessory dwelling units. There's been some conversation around those. So that's basically your backyard homes, or adding an additional bedroom space in your home, a way to have another person living on your lot in some way. So that type of thing needs a lot of zoning and policy changes in order to allow it. Even something people might have been hearing about the move. Kitchener has done it, Waterloo's looking at it. I'm sure Cambridge won't be far behind, about fourplexes being allowed on any lot as of right. As of right comes up a lot in these zoning conversations, and that basically means without needing any sort of additional, say, council approval or changing to official plans and that type of thing, you're just basically allowed to have that. So you're now in Kitchener allowed to have 4 units on a lot. So if you've got somebody who decides to maybe demolish an existing home or just find a way to add additional units to their lot, that is now allowed in Kitchener, up to 4 units.
Right. And there's something with rooming houses that you're involved with as well, isn't there?
Yeah, this actually, so Waterloo Region Yes in My Backyard started around 2018, 2019, and this has kind of been on our radar since then. It's finally nice to see that it's gotten to Kitchener Council, and they'll be discussing that. They have actually discussed it in committee. It's going to council later this month, where we will allow rooming houses or lodging homes. They have different names, but basically that model of 5 or more people in one house with shared amenities like a bathroom and kitchen. That is what we mean by lodging homes. That has not been allowed in every neighborhood throughout the city, so we've been advocating to allow for that, given that lodging homes tends to be one of the more affordable housing options available to people. And we're also advocating that licensing happens. Currently, Kitchener said in their staff report that there's about 20 licensed lodging homes, but they suspect there's maybe over 300 lodging homes that exist. So we do want to see the lodging homes be licensed, but with tenant protection and safety at the forefront, as opposed to trying to control it in some way to fit in a neighborhood, or whatever that might be. Where we want to prioritize tenant safety and protections in that.
Seems to me that the lodging homes are the ones that are generally targeted for destruction and rebuilt into condos.
For sure. And it's interesting to me just where lodging homes fit in all of this. As I said, it tends to be a more affordable type of housing. But I learned, so in 2018, I ran for Kitchener Council, and I learned a lot of interesting things there. And one of the things was that the city of Kitchener, and I think this is changing, but for a long time, they proactively send out letters to anybody, any property owners within a certain distance of a lodging home, proactively asking for things like, how is this lodging home in your neighborhood? Like, do you have any complaints? How is it functioning? And I just thought, what a fascinating thing that exists that feels like if we did that for just regular single detached houses and just said, how have your neighbors been? It seems laughable, but we have been doing that with lodging homes, which feels like it's targeting it for what to me doesn't seem like an obvious reason.
Right. So you're looking to have the bylaws changed so that these aren't targeted especially any longer.
Exactly. And that would happen through Kitchener's proposed shared accommodation bylaw, which they have also mixed in, I guess, with the issue of short-term rentals, so things like Airbnbs. So all of that has come together in one proposed bylaw change, and it has been discussed at Kitchener Council Committee, but it has to get final discussion and approval at, I believe it's later this month at Kitchener Council. At this point, I don't have a sense of whether that's going to pass or not. I think most people are leaning to yes, but there were still some concerns about what that might look like.
Right. Are you involved at all with the larger condos and the inclusionary zoning bylaws?
Yeah, so one of the things that Waterloo Region Yes in My Backyard does is tries to stay on top of the multitude of housing related issues that are coming to local councils and help other people who are interested become aware of them. And there's kind of a flood of things happening right now. So inclusionary zoning is a big one because it's sort of impacting Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo are all kind of working together along with the region of Waterloo to hopefully come up with a coherent inclusionary zoning bylaw approach that would be fairly similar across all of those cities, so you don't have drastically different rules from one city to another, just for ease of development or not to accidentally incentivize it in one community and not in another.
Right.
So Kitchener has approved it. Waterloo and Cambridge, and I think the region are still in process of having those discussions.
Right. And this is all done at the municipal level, not at the regional level.
It gets tricky. So a lot of it is at the city level, but things like affordable housing often fall under the region or even the province. Province has a lot of say on some housing things, so it's becoming involved in WRYIMBY has definitely opened my eyes to the specific levels of government and the roles they play. And unfortunately, that sometimes leads to finger pointing among the different levels. Like, it's not me, it's your level. And trying to get all of that sorted out is one of the things where, like, where do we put pressure on if we want to see changes? We're largely focused on the cities, but there's been more interest in what's happening at the provincial and federal level as we see conversations happening at that level as well.
You've had some little victories locally recently.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple things. As I mentioned, the fourplexes feels like a step in the right direction. It for me personally, when I hear the premier say things like referencing fourplexes as towers and that type of thing, I mean, I think that's just representative of an approach that's not helpful. As much as YIMBY is a counter position to NIMBY, I don't think that I'm not even sure, like, othering of the other side is helpful. I think there needs to be some recognition that seeing these changes in a neighborhood can be challenging, but also a recognition from the other side that having more people in a neighborhood can add vibrancy, it can bring transit, it can bring amenities. So having those conversations. So I think the 4-unit thing is one small step that will allow us to maybe point to successes and say, look, this is this isn't as scary as we all thought it would be. I know Kitchener Council is also looking at rental replacement bylaw too, which looks at, unfortunately, I think the provincial act that overrules municipalities, the Municipal Act, says this can only apply to demolished buildings, but if tenants are evicted due to a building being demolished, likely for redevelopment of maybe condos or an apartment, that the city has been looking at what are the tools they can put in place to support tenants, and whether that's first right of return, that they can come back, that they would be compensated with a certain number of months rent or free rent. They're looking at a few things, and they're bringing that to council today, actually. So that will be an interesting conversation to follow.
Yeah, there's a number of other organizations that work out of the Civic Hub that are dealing with similar issues. Are you butting heads or shaking hands?
I think we're leaning towards the shaking hands for sure. I think there's going to always be points that we see differently. People have thoughts about condos, and I think we need all of the types of housing. Not everybody agrees with that. That's fine. I think for the most part, we tend to agree on a lot more than not. So let's focus on that. So ACORN is a great example, and I always forget what their long acronym stands for, but I know it's about reform now, and they're really supporting tenants in organizing. They have been a great resource for us because I think there is this tension in the community, and I know we feel at WRYIMBY in that we think we need more housing, but there are people who are existing in kind of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, which is not purpose-built affordable. It's not through the Region of Waterloo's affordable housing list, but because it was maybe built in the 70s or 80s, and there's been new builds now that are maybe a little fancier or updated, that the older stock just becomes naturally more affordable. And so people are living in those, and those sometimes become prime spots for redevelopment. Partly, I would argue, because we make it so difficult to build in some of the single family detached home neighborhoods. So if we made it easier to build a little bit higher in all neighborhoods, we might not need to rely so heavily on tall towers in certain parts of the city.
And by a little bit higher, talking about those fourplexes.
And maybe even higher. Like, I would love to see sort of 4 stories to 6 stories kind of allowed in most neighborhoods. But I think if we had more of that, maybe we wouldn't need those sometimes controversial tall towers. Where was I going with that?
Yeah, just the redevelopment and I guess the renovictions is where we're at.
Yes. So the city can't allow for rental replacement rules in the case of renovictions, which is a huge issue in a lot of cities, and ours included. And that's where tenants might get a notice that they need to leave because the unit needs to be changed enough that you can't live here when this is happening. And there's some concern that those are not always being used in an accurate way, and that people are being kicked out of their spaces, their more affordable spaces, and then landlords can increase the rent. So especially long-term tenants, people who have been in the same unit for many, many years, sometimes decades, and they have that affordable rent because you're limited by provincial rules about how much you can raise the rent. And so landlords see a potential to bring in more money. Some landlords, I don't want to say all landlords. And so that can be a real challenge. This rental replacement bylaw doesn't address that, and it can't, unfortunately, through the Municipal Act, but it can put some things in place for when a building is going to be demolished entirely. And so I think, again, small step in the right direction. Yeah.
So on that line, you've had some other provincial setbacks lately too. For housing, talking about the Green Belt Act, the More Homes at Lower Cost bill. I can't quite remember the
well, there's
correct
been
name of
so
it.
many bills at the provincial level, and they all seem to have like a very similar title, like Building More Homes Faster, and some of those. And again, it's hard to keep track of them all, but I've been disappointed. There was some hope from a YIMBY perspective, at least, with the provincial housing task force that came out, I'm going to say a year and a half ago, that did propose allowing fourplexes in every municipality as a right and some of those things. But the Premier kind of backed away from that, whether that was pressure from, I'm not sure who, but we see this consistently, I would say, with this Premier, that an idea is floated and then it's walked back in some way. And the whole Greenbelt stuff the fiasco is, again, I feel representative of what we're dealing with this government. And it's very hard to, one of the things that helps get housing built is knowing what the rules are. And so whatever we decide on the rules, it's best if we kind of stick with them, where it feels like they're changing all the time. Municipal planning departments are really struggling to keep up. They're trying to stay one step ahead, and I don't think that's feeling possible for them right now. It's a real challenge. For sure.
Even when there's the rules in place, we still have those ministerial override orders.
Right. Which, again, I feel like everything in this conversation is so nuanced, because we have plenty of examples under, I think it was Steve Clark was the housing minister at the time, more ministerial zoning orders than any other government had previously. But then I see, the city of Waterloo is going to be asking for one. The short form of that is MZO or MZO. And they will be asking for one for affordable housing for lands on University Ave. And I think that's a perfect example of when we should use them. So I believe that they have a place and can be used well. This particular government hasn't necessarily used them that way.
And yet, if the municipalities had freer reign to enact bylaws and zoning laws, these MZOs wouldn't be necessary at all.
I think that's a fair point, yeah.
How can one get involved with EMB? How does EMB do its outreach?
So we've got a few different ways. We have monthly meetings on the fourth Thursday of each month. We had been doing, during the pandemic, we had moved solely online. We've just started shifting back to trying hybrid meetings, which is a new thing for us, but we're giving that a shot. And so, yes, we meet monthly, and that's usually a time where we are just connecting with each other. What are the things that we should be focusing on? What are the things coming down at councils? What are other organizations doing? But we've also done a few other things, like we've had a couple of book clubs. We've had a mini conference where we had panelists speak to housing issues like affordable housing, tiny homes, upzoning. So we try to get out in the community in various ways. It is coming up to summer, and like the official event for me for summer is like kickoff event is the Multicultural Festival, which is this weekend. We have had a booth at the Multicultural Festival for many years now, and we'll be there again this year. And we just set up, we try to engage in a variety of ways there, because it's so interesting. I feel like housing is one of those issues you can ask anybody and they will have some thoughts on it, often strong thoughts on it. And so it's interesting to have those conversations and share our perspective and learn what other people's experiences are. I'm always impressed and surprised by how willing people are to sort of share their personal experience in the housing realm. So some of these community festivals will often have petitions. So we've had a petition at the federal level that we could double the affordable housing stock that we have, because we fall sort of below the G7 average, and there's work that could be done there. We've had petitions at the city level around lodging homes, as we talked about earlier. And then we try to do some fun things too. Like we've had little, I think we had 50 Lego bricks and a little Lego plate. And we encouraged people to find, we said each of those 50 Lego bricks were represented a household. And we need to get these 50 households into this, let's say it's a city block. And so we just, there was a really interesting conversation that followed with people who participated in that, because some people were like, oh, if you put 48 households in one tall tower, then you could still have a little bit of people in like shorter housing, ground-oriented housing, and have some park space and some other things there. Other people were like, oh, I don't really like the tall towers, so I'm going to just have a whole bunch of like 3 to 6 story ones, and just to see what people's personal preferences are, and encourage them to think about, people are coming to this region. It has a lot to offer. And so I don't think we can deny the fact that growth feels inevitable, at least right now for our community. So we have to think about how people can meet their housing needs and where that will happen. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do, is encourage people. Anyways, back to your original question. People can find out more about us at wremb.com. And our email is up there. We're on Twitter too, under the same WREMB. We're trying to insert ourselves in a bunch of different conversations out there.
Lovely picture on the wremb.com website. Looks like a drawing of possibly an urban setting.
Yes, so this was one of the things. We just purchased like a really big sort of paper tablecloth, and at the festivals we were going to, we encouraged people to add something to it. They could draw, they could write, and this was something that children participated in, adults of all ages participated in. As a preschool teacher, I really love what the children bring to it, because I feel like they've got it figured out. They makes a good neighborhood, and some of their ideas are what I think are the best ideas. I might be biased because I'm a preschool teacher, but so people were just drawing the things that they loved about their neighborhood, something they thought was missing from their neighborhood, something that they thought every neighborhood should have. And so what we were left with was like this beautiful picture of what can happen when we welcome more neighbors to our community.
Right. Links on there to join the mailing list and to get involved.
Perfect. There, we also have a bit of a Facebook presence. We're not on there as much, but we're working on our mailing list. So that's probably the best way to stay up to date. We're trying to not only include some of the things that we're working on, but also some of the upcoming things going to council. What are other community organizations doing? So just trying to make it a little bit more of a robust one-stop shop for all your housing information kind of thing.
And we'll duplicate all that information on the show notes at civichubwr.org.
Perfect.
Click on the Welcome to the Civic Hub link, and you'll see all the podcasts there with show notes.
Sounds good.
Yeah. The in-person meetings that you're having now, they're taking place at the Civic Hub, no doubt.
They are, and I have to say this has been a huge benefit because, as I may have said, I'm not really like a hybrid person. I don't really know how to make all of that happen. So to be able to touch base with the folks at the Civic Hub and be like, we want to try to do hybrid. And they're like, oh, we've got a whole setup. We'll make that happen. We arrive and it's ready to go. And that just makes a non-tech person like me very thankful to have that resource. And as somebody who's been involved in a variety of volunteer organizations, neighborhood associations, that type of thing, I would say one of the number one concerns or challenges is how do you access, affordable, accessible community space, and to have that as one of the things that you can access through the Civic Hub is a real benefit. And I would also say the email list, it's such a simple thing, but it's an easy way for us to quick get out an important housing related message to often like-minded folks, people who are paying attention to these issues, as well as hearing from other people. That's kind of how we learned about some of the things with Unsheltered Campaign and Acorn and a few others. So it's simple, but it's really beneficial to the partners in that.
Right. Have you done any joint work with the other housing groups at the Civic Hub?
It's mostly casual, informal with people who are, say, on Acorn or Unsheltered who attend our meetings or vice versa. So it hasn't been sort of a formal partnership. We have done a little bit of formal stuff with somebody like a group like Hold the Line, Waterloo Region, where we're writing joint letters and statements to advocate for things at the provincial level. But right now with some of the other Civic Hub partners, it's pretty casual, just trying to stay up to date on who's doing what and trying to know who should take the lead on any particular issue and what role WREMB might have. Is it a lead role on this one, or is it more of a supportive, we'll let a different group sort of speak to this one?
As with all these organizations, there's a lot of overlap in the membership. So
very much.
When you do things like delegated council, is council aware of which group you happen to be representing on a particular day?
So that's a conversation that we have sometimes because we're like, oh, is this an official WREMB position that I'm delegating on, or is this my own Melissa Bowman position? And so we usually do have conversations about that. And, you know, we want to have, as WREMB, we want to have a amicable relationship, like a friendly relationship with counselors, developers, builders, nonprofits. And so we try to be intentional about what our approach is. Sometimes when I'm an individual, I might be a little bit more frustrated or grumpy with something, and I will share that. So I might do that as an individual. I don't want to necessarily represent WREMB as that.
Right, right. When you've gone to council and delegated as part of WREMB, what's been the range of things that you've delegated?
A little bit of everything. So I feel like in early days, we just felt like we needed to speak whenever there was a housing development being proposed that had some density to it, because council was hearing from people, but it was only people opposed. And to some degree, if you think of human nature, that makes sense. When you're upset about something, you want to advocate against it. Saying that you're like, I'm fine with that housing development doesn't necessarily motivate people to get out. So we wanted to intentionally provide that alternative voice saying, you know what, more housing can be a good thing. So that was kind of in the early days. This lodging home thing has been on the radar kind of from day one. So that's been a long process. We've had a couple of our members really focused on that for many years. So it's great to see that coming forward. Sanctioning encampments has been something we've spoken in favor of. Long term, we want to have a community where encampments, at this point, they are meeting a need, and so we can find an alternative way to meet that need. We think we need to allow them, and closing them down just sends it away and out of sight, and that's not beneficial really for anybody. So a little bit of everything: affordable housing, sustainability. Basically, I would love to see the conversation around housing shift from we're against it because of height, density, shadows, parking, traffic, and what can we do to better improve any housing proposals that looks at sustainability, accessibility, affordability, and that type of thing. So I think there are important conversations that need to happen around housing. I just think we're focusing on the wrong things.
Right. Seems to me that YIMBY is at the forefront of being in favor of additional housing, whereas the opposition, the NIMBYs, seem to be different at every development that arises. So
it definitely feels that way. And I think, I think it's great that people love their neighborhoods how they are, but I think we need to understand that having more neighbors won't necessarily ruin that. There's this idea that the character of a neighborhood is important in some way, and I like the idea that it's the characters in a neighborhood that make the difference. So it's the people in the neighborhoods, not the buildings specifically.
Right. Melissa Bowman from Yes in My Backyard, thank you so much for coming out to Welcome to the Civic Hub. And Melissa, welcome to the Civic Hub.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Welcome to the Civic Hub, where we welcome community partners to the Civic Hub. The Civic Hub is online at https://civichubwr.org. You can reach the Civic Hub by email at civichub@waterlooregion.org. Welcome to the Civic Hub is produced at the studio of CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. The show is sponsored by the Social Development Center of Waterloo Region. The executive producer is Alexander Petrovich. Ritika Sharmali is a producer and host, and I'm Bob Jonkman. Civic Hub is supported by the Region of Waterloo Upstream Fund. The theme music is A Good Bass by Kumiku from the Free Music Archive and used under a Creative Commons CC0 license.